Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg.
I'm Joel.
And we are here to film our monthly reading wrap-up for the month of September. We are doing this a little bit early because I know you've heard this a lot at this point, but we are going to be in Italy for the first half of October. And we told you we were going to be insufferable about this, so we're being insufferable about this. So we leave on Wednesday. So September's not going to be over, and we just wanted to film this a little bit in advance so we can make sure we get it filmed and edited and schedule it ahead. So there are some books that I'm not done with, but should be done with before the end of the month. So I'm still going to include them here, and we'll go from there.
Yeah.
Lots to talk about. So I have right now only finished 4 books in the month of September. I'm hope it will be an additional 3, so 7 altogether. Is that proper math?
Yep.
Yeah. For me, how did you do?
I have 8 finished, and I'll probably have 2 by the time we get on the plane.
Okay.
So
yeah. So that is where we're at in terms. Let's dive in and talk about them. Do you want to go first?
Go for it.
Me to go first? All right. So my first book that I finished was Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. This is volume 3. And it continues to be a really cute series. I feel like a broken record about it at this point. My only complaint is that the graphic novels themselves, clearly you were supposed to binge them, and I resist that a little bit. But it's an adorable story. I'm glad I read it. It has nice complications. I know a lot of people were freaking out because they didn't release the trailer, but they teased that they started filming season 2 of the TV show. And at the end, Nick says bonjour. And this involves a field trip to Paris. So it'll be really interesting to see if they do that, and I hope they do. It'll be really cute.
Yeah,
We've watched the show.
the series is really good.
It's cute.
So
that was my first read. And I should mention also this was, I took a break from reading in the middle of the month. So my numbers are a little low, but it kind of is what it needed to be. And the quality of the books is still really good. And so that was my first. What was yours?
okay. My first was All the White Spaces by Ali Wilkes.
Mm-hmm.
It was it got intrigued to me because they promoted it with a quote from Shackleton, who did Endurance, which is a Antarctic voyage.
He loves it.
One of my favorite books. Yeah. So I was like, okay, this could be good. It was an Antarctic voyage in the early 1900s. And there was a transgender man who stowed away, and his boyfriend was the animal trainer. So he kept all the dogs going. And the book had nothing to do with really him being a transgender. It's just he was. And now we got a story. But it was a very dark horror, some ghost, and it was interesting and a little spooky and scary because the ghosts would come to you as somebody who you love and miss, and they would drag you out into the white spaces until you died. And it's a pretty dark book, but I really enjoyed it. As many of you know, I like Antarctic stories, so that fit right in.
And that was another one where, as you were reading it, you were telling me about it, and I was like, what are you reading? And I think I was literally at that time reading Heartstopper, so it was like, okay. And I think you mentioned it in the wrap-up that we did for August, because I think at the time we filmed it, September had already started and you finished it. And I think you got some good recommendations.
I did, so thank you for all that. So
yeah.
I got a couple I'm going to do probably in October for Halloween. So
vibes.
Yes.
Yeah. And the August wrap-up will be linked down below if you'd like to check that out. So I don't want to. Was that everything for that one?
Yep.
For that, okay. Okay. I don't want to step on your toes. My next book was Nightcrawling by Leila Mottley. I think I had started this in August and it carried over into September. This was really great. I liked it a great deal. It is difficult. It has a lot of triggers. Jamie is mad because somebody drove by. It was longlisted for the Booker Prize. It did not make the short list. I think that's really disappointing. I was kind of hopeful that it would make the long list for the National Book Award, and it didn't make that either. But I will say it's a really great book. It's a difficult book. It is about a woman who is a teenager. She's 17 when the book starts, and she is just barely scraping by and is supporting her brother and the 9-year-old boy who lives in the apartment next to hers. And when there is a rent increase, she gets desperate to try to take care of all of that. And she ends up being taken advantage of by the police in Oakland. And it's inspired by a true story that Leila Mottley, who was only, I think, 20 years old, saw in the papers when she was in high school. And she wrote a book now, and that's really impressive. So it's a great book. It is difficult, but I'm really glad that I read it and that I finished it. It was very good.
My next book was The Holiday by M. Tasia, as one of my man-for-man romance. Because I was reading such a dark book during the day on audio, I had to do kind of the romance at night while in bed to kind of just calm down and go. It was cute. Yeah, that's about it.
And I think that's kind of the reason I finished Heartstopper first is that I think I needed something a little cheerful. So yeah, same vibe.
Yeah, so during the day I read horror, at night I read romance. So a little something for everything.
Gotta have an escape.
So that's it.
Yeah. So that is where my little reading break hit. I had started American War by Omar Akkad. That ended up being a DNF, so I'm just going to mention that now. It was a really good book. It seemed very well written. The reason I did not finish, I think I made it like 20% in, just about, was more that it's set in a near future where there is a second civil war and society, it's almost like the road at that point. Society has been kind of torn apart. There are warring factions. It's very dangerous to move around. So that feels a little too real. Like in the book, which was published, I think in 2017, the thing that causes the second civil war is disagreement over fossil fuel rights, like people trying to move toward energy efficiency and other people saying, no, you shouldn't do that. And it is kind of funny because now with how divisive politics have become, you don't really need an excuse like that. But it felt a little too real and it was triggering some stress. So that is the reason I put it down. It has nothing to do with the quality of the book. It seemed like it was well written. So that's why I put that down. And I, right around that time, I started another book and then took a break from reading, but I'll hold that one for next. So my next book was a DNF.
Okay. My next book was You Know Me Well by David Levithan. We actually bought this for our next door neighbor who has a very young woman, just going through some hard times. And so while at Montana Book Company, we were looking for books that would help with acceptance and everything. It is a YA, and I know this month we've talked a lot about YA among you and I.
Yeah.
I've read a lot of YAs that I have felt really good about, and it's been good for me to read. And I don't think it should be classified, but it's one of those that I like them. But I think they're great for adults too. Yeah,
I think the thrust of our conversation a lot was largely that a lot of people denigrate YA and don't take it seriously, and there are really good YA books out there. So
I've had some great reads in the last couple of years that are considered YA, but I found them to be a little bit heavier too, that I don't know if I would want a kid to read them. Yeah. But You Know Me Well was really good. It was about a boy and a girl. They kind of met out they're in high school, but they met in a gay bar one night, and it's just like, I know you, and they became friends. And it's a little bit of accepting new friends and not throwing away your old friends and learning how to branch out. And they helped each other through some really hard times of coming to terms with one was gay, one was lesbian, and going to college. And I thought it was a really great book for this young lady that we got it for, but I loved it too.
Yeah, and I want to read it. I think it's on Scribd, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have it saved, and I'll probably get to it. Maybe not this year, but next year, because I would like to.
Yeah.
Especially after you started talking about it. It sounded even better.
It was good.
Yeah.
What do you got?
All right, so my next one is the one that I had started. I was halfway through when I took my little reading break. It's The Marriage Portrait by Maggie. I actually listened to it on audio, and I liked the first half. When I first picked it back up after taking a week off, I was kind of struggling to get back into it, and I really thought that was because I had taken a week off. I thought that interrupting the book had done something to the experience of it, but then people started commenting on a Friday Reads video and mentioning that they weren't very into the second half of the book. And then as the book went on, I had a couple of issues with the book itself that kind of let me know, all right, it's not the fact that I took a break, it's more things that I have with the book. I was really excited about this because I'm a big fan of Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, which won the Women's Prize, and which was one of my favorite books of the year in which I read it. I was really looking forward to it. And I mean, how much did I talk about this book before? A lot. And I talk a lot in general. So, I was really looking forward to it. I enjoyed the first half and I liked it. I think it's a good book. I think it's well worth your time. You might not have the same problems that I did. I just think that there are aspects of Lucrezia, the main character, it's hard to reconcile the version of her that is portrayed as a child and the version of her that is a teenage bride. Because the story kind of moves back and forth between them, and I don't really see that. And I understand why her husband, the man that she marries, the Duke of Ferrara, is hard to access, and I think that's deliberate on Maggie O'Farrell's part because it says a lot about how women could be treated by their husbands and just not given information or access to the world, and everything they had to be very obedient. But so he's kind of a cipher. You don't really understand his motivations, but because Lucrezia is a bit the same way, like hard to reconcile, it impacted the book. And then there is something about the ending that I can't talk about without spoiling, but I didn't like an aspect of the ending, and that was kind of unfortunate. But so it's a good book. You might like it more than I did. I have had some comments on my most recent Friday Reads video that some people said that they really liked it. There are some people who agreed. So I still definitely want to read more Maggie O'Farrell books, and I'm looking forward to what she does more. I kind of hope that she stays in this wheelhouse where she looks at shadowy women in history who you don't know a whole lot about and sort of imagines what their life is. I just think Hamnet was more successful than this one. And I definitely want to read her nonfiction book, I Am as well, which is about, I think, 12 brushes with death that she's had in her life. It sounds really interesting. She's a beautiful writer. So that was my next book. What was yours?
Mine was Channel of Peace by Kevin Tuerff. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce that. It was kind of a little bit of a memoir. If you've looked at our past couple of months, we've talked a lot about The Day the World Came to Town, Come From Away. Well, this was one of the guys featured in Come From Away, who he and his partner at the time were these two gay guys in Gander, Newfoundland. And he talks about his take on how the generosity of the town really came and helped him, and how he struggled with being gay in this little town. And it turned out to be just fine. Yeah. His book was a little bit more on his faith and his religion. Kind of how it pulled through and how it restored some of his faith in humanity. So it was a nice book. It was sweet, short. But the one thing I liked about Kevin of what he did is every year after on the 9/11 first anniversary and every year after on the anniversary, he would give his employees $100 and say, go out and do a good deed, pay it forward.
I love that.
And it's actually turned into a really large kind of organization now that he kind of oversees. And I just wanted to know more about the Come From Away and the people and how they did. So it was a good read.
So I think it was the charitable thing that really drew you in when you heard that, but also the fact that he was one of the part of the gay couple in Come From Away and the anniversary of 9/11. One thing that was interesting is, so in Come From Away, the gay couple is Kevin and Kevin. They're both named Kevin. And they're actually not both Kevin.
They're not both Kevin.
I was scandalized.
I think it was Kevin and Evan.
Yeah.
But for the play, it was kind of cute.
Yeah, it was. And in real life, the fact that it was Kevin and Evan is still really funny. Yeah. But it was just, I was a little scandalized. Yeah. So
good book.
Yeah.
Okay, what do you got?
So my next book that I finished just yesterday was Lawn Boy by Jonathan Evison. I picked this up because of Banned Books Week. It is frequently banned or most often challenged because of sexually explicit content or explicit sexual content. And there's actually not really much explicit content in the book. I mean, the character, Miguel or Mike Munoz, he goes by Mike, talks about sex, thinks about sex a fair amount, but like not in almost like to compare it to like American Pie makes it sound like more than what it is, because there is explicit sexual content in American Pie, but notice nobody's complaining about that. And one of the things I really value about reading banned books is kind of seeing what the story actually is. So people complain about explicit sexual content in this book, and yeah, I mean, there's like a heavy makeout scene, and he remembers experimenting with another boy in 4th grade, and so it's not the volume of the sexual content that seems to be the problem. It's not how explicit it is so much as the fact that it was done by 2 men. That's the actual problem. And I think when you read books that are banned and challenged, you get to see the story behind the story a lot of the time. And going to what you were saying, so this is technically a YA book, even though the protagonist is 22, and it covers a lot of really heavy issues as well, because he comes from a very poor family. He is not an immigrant. I think his father immigrated from Mexico. I can't remember. But he is treated and denigrated as if he is an immigrant a lot of the time. And his family is very poor. As I said, he starts out as a landscaper in the beginning of the book, and then very quickly, like in the first chapter, loses his job because his boss is just wildly taking advantage of him and disrespecting him and the other workers, and he decides he's not going to take it. So they get into an argument, he leaves, and he goes on a series of, like an odyssey of different jobs. To me, it almost felt like a satire, like kind of like Gulliver's Travels, where each job is like its own little adventure, its own little lesson in a different way of exploiting people like Mike. Like he gets a job for a guy who is just wildly doing illegal activity and exploiting Mike in a very specific way. He gets a job for another guy who lifted himself up out of the neighborhood, but is white, I believe. So he has a higher level of privilege and access than Mike does. And he also starts using Mike in a very different way. And part of Mike's struggle is he knows if he did underhanded and bad things, he probably could get ahead. He just really doesn't want to do those. So it's about him and his struggle to get to a place where he's going to be at least reasonably comfortable in life. And he is, because of this experience in 4th grade, kind of questioning what that means for him and his romantic life. And it's very critical of systems in America that tell you if you don't get ahead, you're lazy or you're not good enough. And he's like a good-hearted person who's really trying and working very hard and not able to get ahead. So I feel like it also is a case where people are complaining about explicit sexual content, but they're really just not. That sounds like a reasonable complaint about something that just makes them feel uncomfortable, because it definitely puts a lie to that sort of worldview that if you're not making it, you're just not working hard enough. So the book, I would say, is mostly just fine, but I'm really glad that I read it for Banned Books Week. So,
thanks.
Yeah.
My next book was The Wolf Bin by Elodie Harper. It was recommended to us while we're at Montana Book Company. They said, it sounds like a fun book, but it's about a woman who is sold to a brothel in Pompeii. And so we figured, hey, why not read it before we go to Italy?
We're going to be in Pompeii.
We are going to be in Pompeii.
In a week. So.
And but it was kind of her life in the brothel and what she had to go through to make her way into the world. And the Wolf Den is the name of the brothel. So it was dark in areas, but very interesting. Yeah. I had a good time reading it, understanding some things in Pompeii that I want to look for when we get there. Yeah. And see what we can find. But it was kind of fun to read.
And, when you're going to be somewhere, why not? So
when in Italy. Read about Italy.
Yeah, literally when in Italy. So for me, that you still have books to talk about. For me, this gets to the point where I haven't finished stuff. So where am I? I'm on page 97 of Mouse Volume 1, My Father Bleeds History. And I think there are 160 pages in this book. It's a graphic memoir. It reads really quickly. We've been busy getting ready to go.
Yeah.
So I haven't really had a chance to sit down and tear through it. So I'll be done with this by the end of September. I'm just not done with it right now. I could probably even finish this tonight before bed.
Yeah.
That'd be easy enough. The last 50 pages will probably fly. So if you're unfamiliar, this is, and actually I was just telling Joel, it is the only graphic novel that has ever been awarded a Pulitzer Prize. It was awarded a special citation, so not a strict Pulitzer Prize, like one of the main categories. My guess is someone probably wanted to give it a Pulitzer in one of the other categories, probably or biography, and the board or other people on the jury said you can't give that to a graphic novel. So it still is the only one that has been given a Pulitzer Prize, but it was a citation, not a specific award. And Art Spiegelman's father survived World War II. He went to Auschwitz. So both graphic novels, graphic memoirs, are stories that his father tells him about how he survived and what he went through in the lead up to the war. I, of course, remember this being heavy because of the subject matter. It's actually heavier than I remembered it being. Or maybe it's just that the world being... Like, I read this 20 years ago for the first time, I think. And the world being what it is now, parts of it feel a little too real. That's probably not helping, but it's really good, and I'm looking forward to it. And then, spoiler, I'll just mention, I have Mouse Volume 2, and Here My Troubles Began here. And I am going to try to finish this before we leave for Italy, because, again, it's the same length. It's a graphic memoir, should read really quickly. I believe, if I remember correctly, My Father Bleeds history is mostly about leading up to when the father ends up in Auschwitz, and then... And Here My Troubles Began is where he is in the camp, and then deals with the lasting implication of, because it's really about how that experience traumatized the father and his mother. I think his mother committed suicide at some point, and just the lasting devastating effects of the Holocaust on them. And so I'll finish that. This was also something that I was doing for Banned Books Week, because unfortunately these are both frequently challenged by people. So what was your next?
Greg and I were discussing classics one night at dinner, and I have never seen the movie, never read the book, so I did The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald.
And that was also Banned Books Week, right?
Yes.
Because this is classically one of the most challenged books.
Yeah. I don't get why, but I kind of do. It was really good. I've never seen the movie. I didn't know anything about it. I just thought it would be a fun read, and so I read it and had a good time with it. So.
Yeah, it's a good book. It is especially interesting because if you've seen any of my Pulitzer Prize videos, Great Gatsby was not very popular when it was first published. It did not sell very well. It was largely considered a failure, and then during World War II, it was included in some paperbacks that were given to soldiers to keep them occupied while they were overseas, and it became popular through that and rediscovered, and then became the classic that we know it as now. So it's a really interesting story as behind the book as well.
And then my other book for Banned Book Week was Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe by Fannie Flagg.
I may have really heavily pushed.
I absolutely love the movie, and I know the movie, but I know the book is a little different. The book is a lot different.
A lot different.
And, oh my God, I loved it.
It's so good.
It was really good. Another reason why I read this one is because we did find this in one of the bookstores, a used bookstore. It's basically the cookbook from the Fried Green Tomatoes. So I'm very excited to jump into here and get some recipes out of here and have some fun with it. So
I think the deal with this is that it's supposed to be Sipsy's recipes, right?
Yeah. So,
if you've read the book, you know Sipsy.
Yeah, but I mean, it has some good old-fashioned recipes in there.
Beaten biscuits, buttermilk biscuits.
So got to do it. So I'm going to have fun with this fall, and love the book.
This is so good. It is very different from the movie.
It is.
It's very similar in a lot of ways, but it departs in a lot of other ways as well. Yeah. It's much more explicitly LGBTQ in the book as well.
Much more than the movie.
Yeah. So the movie implies a lot. The book pretty flat out says it. Yeah. It's so good.
And by the way, it was Big George in the book that says the secret's in the sauce.
You asked me if they say it in the book, and I was like, I think they do, because I read this a couple of years ago at this point.
If you don't know what that means, read the book.
And watch the movie. Sure, do that. And I don't know if I've shown you, because you listened to it on audio.
I did.
How was the audio?
The audio is really good, because they talk from like the 1920s. They also talk about the 1989s, the modern part. But then a lot of the little clips in between was a woman who does a newspaper, and so she reads the little newspaper clippings.
That's exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah,
you got me exactly where I wanted to go. The Weems Weekly.
Weems Week, and and the author was really good at reading it like old time newspapers.
Yeah,
it was
It's so charming.
It is.
It is.
It
and
is.
I love the Weems Weekly. Like it ends. This edition of the Weems Weekly that I randomly opened to ends with. P.S. My other half came home from the Dill Pickle Club fishing trip without any fish again and with poison ivy to boot. He said it was Idgie's fault because she told him to sit there. Ruth said Idgie had a bad case of it too. It's just so charming.
Yeah,
it really is.
Really a good, and I'm really sorry to see it on a banned book list, but it was really sweet. And I think I got mad at you because it's going to hit my top 10 this year.
Oh, you did?
So it's going to push something out of my top 10 that I really, really love. So.
Yeah, he was like, I'm going to have to redo my top 10 and it's going to be really hard to figure it out. And I was like, well.
So
life is tough.
And then we did the cook. Then I'll have the cookbook.
Then we have the cookbook. We will need to. Because even the ones featured on the front, Southern Barbecue Banana Split Pie.
I want to make
Banana Split Pie sounds really good. So that was... I'm glad you finally read that. Unfortunately, I can't recommend the sequel. The sequel was it The Last Boy Whistle Stop? I'll put the title down here. I can't remember what it was. I was disappointed.
Yeah.
I would almost be curious what you think of it, but I don't think it's essential at all. There's better to do.
I have my year laid out of some things I really, really want to get to. So I have some good reading coming up. What I'm finishing up right now is Slippery Creatures by K.J. Charles. It's another male-on-male romance, but it takes place in like 1920 in a very dusty old bookstore. So it's kind of exciting. So it's fun, it's charming, and it's fun. And then the other is You Got Me On, Amateur, by Thomas Page McBee, about a transgender man who gets into boxing. And I'm fairly new into it, and but it's actually quite interesting, and just his life and why he got into boxing.
Yeah.
And then when we get on the plane, I'm going to read One Italian Summer, which is a quick read. So I think it's a Reese book. I don't know.
It has the vibe of one.
It does.
I don't know if it is or not.
So I think it has that vibe. Maybe that's why I'm thinking of it.
Yeah.
But a couple of people recommended it to me, said it was very good.
Yeah,
so.
I've heard a lot of good things about it. Yeah. So, and when you're done, I might pick it up. We'll see where we're at. The only other thing I had going on is I was reading now in November. I got, I think, 49 pages into it. And then I took my reading break. And I hadn't gotten back into it because I really when I started reading again, I really pushed to finish the audio of Marriage Portrait so I could get into the audio of Lawn Boy, and didn't really get into this. And then Thursday, when I started thinking about it, I was like, well, I'm not going to finish this before we leave. And I'm not taking my Franklin Library edition of Now in November to all the different places in Italy where we're going. So I'm going to put this, it's not a DNF. I am enjoying it. The first 49 pages are really good. So I'm going to put it down and not finish it in September. And when we get home, I will pick it back up, and hopefully I'll finish it in October. Isn't it pretty?
Yeah, but you could finish it in November.
Oh my God, how perfect would that be? This is why he's a keeper. Oh, yes, that would be so perfect.
Yeah, just a thought.
Yeah. And did you have one more?
Oh, I did. The last, it was, skipped my mind. It wasn't great. The Last Final Girl by Stephen Graham Jones. He writes some really kind of horror, spooky stuff. And I like some of his past stuff. It was good. But The Last Final Girl was a merge of between a horror film and a book, or real life, a story being told in a book, but with a horror film aspect. But it was definitely The Last Final Girl, so she got it. So it was fun.
Yeah, it sounds like, there's a lot of people were recommending Stephen Graham Jones after the August reading wrap up. And you had actually already read...
I think I read two, The Mannequin and...
I can't remember.
There was one, The Night of the Mannequin, and then something else, and then this
Did you do My Heart is a Chainsaw?
My Heart is a Chainsaw,
okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. And they're just okay.
Yeah.
I mean, they're entertaining enough. I keep going back to them, but
But that says a lot. That definitely adds value to something. But
So that was my reading month.
That was mine. So by the end of the month, I will definitely be done with Mouse Volume 2. I should be done with Mouse Volume 3. Mouse Volume 2. I forgot to mention the audio that I'm currently listening to, which I will be done with before we leave for Italy. It's Learning to Talk, Stories by Hilary Mantel. Obviously, I started this because, unfortunately, she died on Friday, or it was announced that she died on Friday at age 70, and she is a tremendous writer. She wrote the Wolf Hall trilogy, and those are phenomenal books. I understand a lot of people are hesitant, especially since Wolf Hall is a long, very dense, information-packed book. I think I was very frustrated when I read it, which is why I understand everybody who gets frustrated with it or is intimidated by it. It requires a lot of active reading and thinking. There are like 50 characters named Thomas. So it has a cast of characters in the beginning, and you really need that cast of characters. And even then, sometimes I read it a decade ago, I had to Google people constantly, like, which one is this? And sometimes in context in a sentence, like when somebody walks in, it's a little difficult to figure out which Thomas is this. So it requires a lot of thought, but I really think it pays off throughout the series. It's a tremendous, tremendous thing. I had listened to an audio of short stories of hers before, and they were just fine. The Assassination of Margaret Thatcher. These stories are really well observed. They are not, she calls them not autobiographical, she calls them autoscopic, which is interesting. They're inspired by things that happened to her in her childhood. Actually, I just this morning listened to the title story, which is called Learning to Talk, and it's about how it's based on a real experience she had where in school she had to take elocution lessons to get rid of her northern accent, because a lot of people were concerned about their accents. So there was a teacher in the school who was just dedicated to teaching primarily girls how to speak and not sound like they're from the area where they're from. And so it was really interesting. I don't love it on the scale of like Wolf, and that I think is also what's so sad about losing her, is that I was really looking forward to finding out what her next big project was going to be. But I'm really glad I'm doing this. She is a beautiful writer no matter what. So I will be done with that before the end of September as well. And then you are you going to be done with Slippery Creatures before we leave? Probably.
It's going to be very close.
Okay, and then so if you're still doing that, you'll finish on the plane. Ish. I have ideas for what I'm going to be doing. I'm not taking any physical books. A lot of people were not a lot, 2 or 3 people were scandalized by that when I mentioned it in a Friday Reads video. But I'm going to be listening to audiobooks, and there are digital books like through Scribd, through Libby, ebooks that are available. So I'm going to be traveling that way. And I have a lot of ideas for what I would like to read, but I'm not going to make promises or plans, because also we're going to need to sleep on the plane. So, So I have a couple of books I want to take, but I'm doing digital because I'm already going to be overpacking. But Winners is coming out by Frederick Bachman. And this is the third in the Beartown trilogy. And I'm excited about that. Speaking of it, like you were talking about all the characters in this book, Bachman actually did a really cool thing. If you go to his Wikipedia page, it breaks out all the characters, because sometimes I get confused on who some of the characters are, but they'll say who all the characters are, and because it's in a trilogy, there's a lot. So it was kind of a cool thing he did, because then I kind of keep that as a reference. And actually, the Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, the print version of the book has a cast of characters, and it goes by generation, which is really helpful as you read the book. And for anyone who's listening to the audio, they actually have a web page that is the family tree that they can refer you to. So it's really nice when somebody does something like that. So, so there's nothing specific that you have coming up in Italy, right? Or you One Italian Summer.
One Italian Summer, and hopefully the Winners. But after that, just kind of whatever hits me. I'm hopefully going to be doing some exploring and less reading. That's
exactly what I was going to say, because part of why I really don't want to count on what I'm going to read or like tell you what I'm thinking I'm going to read is we're going to be driving around, we're going to be doing stuff. Maybe I'm not going to read a lot. That would be totally fine.
I think most of my reading is going to be digging up historical facts about where we're going and what we're doing.
So we're going to be loosey-goosey and see where it goes. But I think that wraps up my September.
I'm good.
And it's just about Jamie's dinner time, so I should get back to her and make sure she eats. I think that's a good September right there. We'll catch up with you with everything that we do manage to accomplish in October, and certainly we'll wrap up the trip when we get home.
Yep.
So as always, I really appreciate your time, and we will be back. Until next time, happy reading.
Bye.